Do is I will introduce you and say that we're at your home, which is at 623.
Okay, you can start, Rhoda.
I'm Rhoda Zoller with the Jewish Historical Society of Greater New Haven. I'm here today, May 5th, 2008, with Lucille Alderman in her home at 623 Ellsworth Avenue to talk to her about her lifetime of involvement with the Jewish community in New Haven and the greater community of the world. Lucille, thank you very much for giving us the time to talk to you today. I know this is a busy time for you. We usually begin our interviews with a family history. Can you tell me something about your parents? I know that you were born in Bridgeport.
Bridgeport.
And what year were you born?
24.
And who are your parents?
My mother was Esther Lubin Wolf. She was born in Whitensville, Massachusetts. She was the second of 10 children. All except the first survived.
And do you know where her parents were from?
Her mother was born in Elizabeth, New Jersey. Her father came down, I don't know, I think he came from Poland, because his name was Lubin, but it was Lubjanski on their marriage license. And he came in from Canada.
Okay. Do you know about when he came from Poland? No. Okay.
I know that when my mother was a child, she thought the Canuck French he spoke was French, and she was embarrassed in the classroom because she raised her hand when they said potato, and she said patuk instead of pomme de terre, and was mortified. So I know that he was still speaking Canuck French at some time.
And what kind of work did he do here?
He had, before the Depression, he had a dry goods store in Whitensville, and they lost a child. Oh, this is a terrible story. Do you want to tape all this?
Go.
They lost a child. The child was sick, and there was no hospital, and there was no place in Whitensville for Jewish people. And he had to bring the child to Worcester, and so they moved to Worcester after that.
That's very sad.
It was, my mother had been put down a sewer when she was a kid in Whitensville by the Catholic kids. So
It was a tough time. It was a tough time. And what about your father?
my father, they talked very little about it. He had he was also of 9, 5, I think it was 9, 5 girls.
What was his name?
Morris Wolf. Morris E. Wolf, he always said that. E was very important. He and my mother met very romantically. And the interesting story is that my in-laws met the same way. My mother was with Council of Jewish Women, and they were giving a dance for the soldiers at Camp Devens. And they met that way. And as soon as he came home from service, he came back to Worcester, and they got married. My father-in-law met my mother-in-law the same way in Rochester, New York. She was part of Council of Jewish Women. They were giving a dance for the soldiers, and that's how both couples met. It's an interesting coincidence. I'm sorry to divert. I don't know what you're
So where were you born? Where did you live when you were born?
We lived in Bridgeport.
What part of Bridgeport?
My father, we lived on a little street. It was just a block long, Wells Street. And I was 6 when we moved, but I can
Do you remember
still see it
Bridgeport?
well. Well, we had great friends in Bridgeport. We used to go back often to visit. I even went to have my tonsils out in Bridgeport. And the doctor that delivered me was a very close friend of my parents.
Mm-hmm.
So, we went
What brought
back
your
often.
parents to Bridgeport?
My father was he was what they called a broker, food broker. And then when his company failed, he came to work for Connecticut Importing Company. That was Saul Rabinowitz and Morris Brochin on Oak Street in New Haven. and they were like family. They were really quite wonderful. I'm still friendly with Mildred, and Mildred, she was Rabinowitz and then Groves. And Harold Brochin, the son of Morris Brochin, was best man at my wedding. So, you know, they were good people, and those were very hard times, very hard times, the Depression years.
So where did your family live when they came to New Haven?
We lived on Alden Avenue, that apartment that was opposite Doyle's Cleaners, or it was an A&P in those days. Can you imagine an A&P being that small? You know, I don't know if young people can understand how these things were. Well, we lived in that apartment. When we first moved there, things were tough. My brother's bed was in the living room, my bed was in my parents' room. And my kids tease a lot about it, you know, and I'll say Sunday night supper was always a tomato soup, a can of Campbell's tomato soup and saltines. But, you know, things were also very good in a way. The family relationships were good. A family thing, we sat and played Monopoly as a family. I had a brother, Sidney, who was 3.5 years older than I. And families did everything together. We sat around the radio like people sit around television. You know, I can remember the Atwater Kent radio in our living room, and we sat like this around it as if, you know, so hard times were also good times in a way. In a way.
And you went to school in New Haven?
I went to Edgewood, and then I went to Sheridan and Hill House. And of course, you know, Hill House in those days was down where Ezra Stiles is at Yale.
Right.
Everybody went to Hill House.
Were there particular teachers?
When we went to Hill House, Hamden and Woodbridge still went to Hill House. Were the teachers?
Were there
were
particular
wonderful.
teachers that you
There
remember?
was a Dr. Davis, who was our history teacher.
This was at Hill House?
Just marvelous, and I wish you had asked me sooner, because I would have. We had our math teacher, I can't remember his name, was absolutely marvelous, and I think Susan Sheridan was still a teacher then, Dr. Sheridan. I'm not sure, but it seems to me. And I can remember. Yeah, I can remember a lot of the teachers.
Okay. Did your family remain in the same place on Alden Avenue?
No, when I was 10 or 11, my father had tuberculosis, and we had a very hard time that year. And he lost his job, you know. There was no Social Security, no unemployment comp, no hospital insurance. And he was at Gaylord for a year. And my mother didn't drive. She wouldn't have had a car even if she did. And it was a very interesting way she supported us. She had a friend named Ethel Cousins. Ethel Cousins was Doris Cutler's mother. Did you know Doris and Herman Cutler was a doctor in New Haven? And how Ethel used to take my mother to junk shops. And my mother could pick out things that were good, take them home. We walked almost every night. We walked up to the library on Harrison Street, and my mother would look up the signs, the things on the bottom of antiques that would show you where they were made and so forth. She'd look them up in the library and bring them the next day. She'd clean them up. Next day, Ethel would bring her to the antique shops. And that's how she supported us that year. It was really quite remarkable.
Wow.
We'd take the train every Sunday to Wallingford, and we had dear friends who eventually moved to New Haven. Their name was Tanger, Mo and Harriet Tanger. Stanley Tanger, their son, now owns, you know, all the Tanger outlets. They would meet us at the train and drive us up to the sanitarium, and we'd visit with my father, and then they'd pick us up, give us dinner every Sunday night, and put us back on the train. I mean, you just can't imagine friends like that. It was a hard year, but it was, we got through it. And then, you know, my father had to pick up new jobs because it was not easy. But a good salesman is a good salesman. He worked for a roofing company, and then eventually he worked for S&W Foods, and then life was a little more comfortable.
So, when did you move from the Alden Avenue apartment? When you were...
Well, we moved a lot.
Okay.
We moved a lot. When I don't remember what year, we never could buy a house, so we rented a little house on Royden Road, and that's when I became friendly with more of the Jewish kids, because we moved to this neighborhood. And then when that house got sold, we rented a house on Bellevue Road. When that house got sold, we rented an apartment on Boulevard. And then my parents moved to across the street from St. Raphael's. There was an apartment house, 1447 Chapel. And by then my father was doing financially better, and they moved to the apartment house on York Street.
I'm sorry, what street?
York Street.
York Street, okay. Crown Towers?
No, the other
York?
one. The other
Okay.
one. Anyhow, they lived there until my father died, and then my mother lived with me for a couple of years until she had Alzheimer's, before it had a name, and before you had a support system. My mother was an absolute beauty, and but she had an accident when she was, I guess she was about 42. She fell and broke her hip, and Dr. Schur was her doctor, and he went into service. And when I brought her home from the hospital, I said, you know, she's running a fever. And Dr. Schur said, well, I'm sorry, I can't do anything. Call your general doctor. I'm going in. He went into the Army. And she had a blood clot and had to keep the leg elevated. And so it crippled her, you know. And then years later, she was able to stand straight again. But she had been such a beauty that Dr. Rabbi Greenberg, it was Rabbi Greenberg, wasn't it? Who was our rabbi, B'nai Jacob,
Goldberg.
No, Greenberg. Goldberg was
Michigan, Israel.
I don't know Greenberg.
Michigan, Israel.
Mhm.
He said the first day she walked into B'nai Jacob, he was in the middle of a sermon and he looked up and he lost his place. She was a beautiful woman.
So as a child growing up in New Haven, what was your Jewish education or involvement with the Jewish community? Oh, okay, we'll get to that. We'll get to that.
It's in
okay.
here.
All right, so you went to Hill House High School, and
You know, it's an interesting thing. We had, remember, I'm sure you've heard about the terrible hurricane we had in '37. We walked, they sent us out of school. They didn't keep us in the building. We walked home
What
all
school-
the
what
way.
school were you in?
The Hill House.
The Hill
We
House.
walked all the way down Gossett. The elm trees were falling all over the place, and they sent the kids walking home.
Oh my goodness. Oh, so that
But school in those days, it was different, you know. Hill House had morning and afternoon sessions because the school wasn't big enough for us all to be there at one time. And the older kids had the afternoon off because they could do jobs. And the younger ones went to school. We went to school 8 to 12 and 1 to 5, and we got a good education.
what did you do in the afternoons?
Well, I went, you know, the older kids, a lot of them got jobs.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Got jobs.
Did homework.
And did.
Right. How did you meet your husband?
We tell it differently. We had a Friday night club when I first moved to this neighborhood. We had a Friday night club. Jewish kids today, I think, wouldn't do that. Actually, I used to walk over. I still lived in Westville. I used to walk over with Freddie Moretz and Herbie Landorf, and those are names you probably know. We used to walk over through the cemetery. Can you imagine kids doing that today? And Arnold lived here in this house, and we had this Friday night club was at Norma Lear's, which was up the street, Dr. Lear's house. And we had the club in the basement, and we were playing Spin the Bottle. And Arnold crashed the party. He said he was invited. He crashed. And we met in the hall. And my parents were very friendly with his parents, and yet we had never met. I wasn't even invited to his bar mitzvah. So
Now, how old were you at this point when you met him?
it was after his bar mitzvah. So
Okay.
we were
About 14 or 15?
13 or 14.
13 or 14.
13 or
Okay.
14.
Okay.
Anyhow, we got I got him or he got me, whichever it was, and Freddie Moritz got very upset because Arnold was as tall as he was as an adult, and I was still quite small, and he lifted me up and gave me quite a kiss for kids that day, in those days. And Freddie Moritz was small, and he got up, he was going to challenge him to a fight. You have to stop a minute, I have to show you something. Speaking, as long as you ask me how we met.
Wait till he gets it in. Say when.
When he sent me flowers for our 50th anniversary, this was in the, he had gone down to the florist and gave it to the florist so that it was delivered with the flowers. But Arnold was always a detail man, you know, he was always a detail man. So that was
That's funny.
very sentimental.
So you.
So that's how we met. And Arnold always said, ball game isn't over till the 9th inning. So we dated, I dated a lot of other people, perhaps he did too, but that was it. Actually, you know how involved Arnold was in scouting. I was working in the Lojo shop, which was on the first block of Whitney Avenue, and Boy Scout headquarters was upstairs on Whitney, in that building. My father-in-law owned the building across the street, which is now, I guess Pierce built those apartment houses there. But my father-in-law owned the building, and Nat Cutler had a bowling alley. There was a bowling alley there, and Nat Cutler, who then later had Cutler's downtown, Nat had a lunch counter. So Arnold always managed to have his appointment at Boy Scout headquarters around noon, and then he'd knock at the door at Lojo. He didn't come in where the ladies were shopping, and we would go across the street. So those were our courting years. And it was wartime, and you know that old song about what's good is in the army, what's home will never harm me. Well, Arnold said, yes, it will. Yes, it will, because Arnold was 4F, and so those were our courting days. Boy Scouts played a very important part of our life.
Yes, yes.
Very important part of our
And
life.
your family was involved with a synagogue when you were growing up? Oh, that's in there too,
Yeah.
right? Okay, we'll
Yeah.
get to that, okay.
Yeah.
And when were you married?
We were married, it was a hard year. We were married in November '44, but Arnold and I were, on my birthday, my 20th birthday, January 12th, Arnold and I were going out for dinner, and we listened to the radio in the car, and it talked about the terrible losses the Americans were having. The Air Force was having terrible losses. Now, it wasn't like today. You got the news late. They were talking, this was the 12th, and they were talking about losses a week earlier. And I got a knot in my stomach, and I said, Arnold, take me home. I know my brother was in that. And he was killed that day. And yet we got news that he was missing. And then the rabbi said, plan your wedding, you do this. We planned the wedding. The day after the invitations went out, we got word that he was killed. And the rabbi said, you you have to go on with the wedding, just don't have music. So it was, and because of that, because my kids knew it wasn't, they insisted on making a 50th anniversary, a 50th wedding for us. We got married again at B'nai Jacob. We renewed our vows
Very
at
nice.
B'nai Jacob.
Can you see that, Marvin?
Can you see
No,
it?
hold it up. Wait a minute.
So this was on your 50th anniversary
50th
at
anniversary.
B'nai Jacob, a renewal of vows with music.
We did the whole thing. We did the whole thing. My sister-in-law had been my maid of honor. She was my maid of honor. Arnold's uncle, Hilly, who my son was named after, had been our best man. And so my son, who was Hilly,
Mm-hmm.
and named after him, was our best man. And we had a really lovely party.
How nice. How nice.
But, yeah, they're, you know, everything in life.
So when you got
doesn't go
married, you moved
smoothly.
into this house?
Oh, no,
No?
no,
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 no.
no. It was wartime. There weren't
Mhm.
many places available. We lived on 66 Norton Street. There's an apartment house there. It was owned by a cousin of my father-in-law's, Adolph Perroth.
Okay.
There were two Adolph Perroths. Anyhow, it was one. And so in order to get us, my father-in-law had to buy the apartment. He bought the building. He bought the building. And we lived in a small apartment there. And then Sidney was born there. And then and the house is, the next move is in this story too.
Oh, okay.
We bought a little house on Lakeview Terrace before our second child was born. And we moved here in 1952. My father-in-law built the house, I thought, in 1930, but now that I'm ready to sell it, we looked it up, it was 1927 that he started to build it. And so, you know, it has a lot of our memories in it. My baby was not quite a year old when we moved here.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So,
So you've been here a long time?
it took me a long time to make it my house. You know, you move into someone else's house, and they're around, so you're very hesitant to make changes. It was took a long time before it got to be ours.
Now, I know that there is something that you wrote for a radio interview, a panel that you were on with Shirley Schaefer. Probably before 1967, you said.
Yeah, no, you said it was a radio interview. It wasn't. It was we went to organizations where we had, you know, women's organizations were different than they are today. Women's organizations was your social life, because married women weren't working. Married women, very few married women were working. And so that was our activity, our social life, our community service, everything was built around our organization life. So this panel of American women went to various church groups and organizations and spoke.
So it was Jewish and non-Jewish
Oh,
women
yes,
who were
yes,
on the panel.
yeah.
And would you like to read us what
I
you
would
wrote?
love to. I would
Okay.
love to. This was a panel of American women. It was a diverse group. And I was the Jewish representative.
This
on
was
the group.
sometime in the 1960s, you think, right?
Yes.
That you did this.
I know that it was in the 60s because apparently my children were grown. Yeah.
Okay.
I am Lucille Alderman, a Jewish housewife and mother of 4 delightful and individual children. I do believe because of my family, not in spite of them, I'm here today. Any commitment and development I've made in my adult life, I firmly believe has come about largely through internal family life rather than external. My husband, a perennial Boy Scout, has made me love and understand natural beauty, serene and majestic. My children, with their inquiring minds, energies, interests, and open-mindedness, have increased my perspectives and kept me on my toes. One can't stop evaluating one's values when faced with the whys of healthy, happy, growing minds. I grew up in Westville in a congenial environment. I don't see any neighborhood quite like it today. Kids of all ages played together, kick the can, one old cat, and whip. We smoked corn silk behind the garage, baked potatoes in a hole in the ground, and generally just grew. I went to church bazaar, belonged to the Bluebirds at the Congregational Church, said the Stations of the Cross at St. Aidan's. And I don't even remember feeling hurt when I couldn't join dancing class at Newman Club or Edgewood Club, because I knew I was Jewish. I had very little formal religious training. My mother, though brought up in the Orthodox tradition, followed my father's precepts. We belonged to a synagogue, attended on high holidays. My brother was bar mitzvahed and I was confirmed. Among my pleasantest childhood memories was Grandma's on Passover. All of my mother's brothers and sisters were young, a few baby cousins, and above all, my darling grandpa. Surely any caricature of an old Jew I had ever seen had no relationship with this darling, immaculate little man in his celluloid collar. The songs, prayers, wonderful odors, sparkling house with always room for one more. The blue box, for you must celebrate your simcha by giving money to the poor. What is a simcha? Any good fortune. And even in those Depression years, we American Jews knew every day was good fortune, and our tradition obliged us to remember our less fortunate brothers. This is what Jewishness meant to me. Suddenly at junior high school age, I found myself with all Jewish intimates. It seemed a natural gravitation with no outside pressure. I realize now much of it came from within our homes, by subtle and some not so subtle direction. It was then accentuated with fraternity and sorority affiliations. Hitler was marching through Europe, and I recall no discussion, no furor, no excitement. It sickens me. I hope it's my memory playing tricks. Today's bright young people couldn't be so callous, so unaware, could they? And then college, in that fateful year, 1941. Connecticut College, where I met exciting new people beyond my limited circle. Hetty, whose father decorated in World War I in Germany. A world-renowned lawyer whose books are studied at Yale and Harvard, now was behind barbed wire, soon to die. Crime, being a Jew. Connie from Hillsborough, Ohio, who had never before met a Jew. Farley, whose father, the last of the great financiers, Cyrus Eaton, famous or infamous today for his intimacy with Russian leaders. Bam, whose grandfather was the first non-Mormon governor of Utah. That was Bamberger. Sue Kreidner, that she was a Coles, daughter of one of the largest publishers in the Midwest, and me, daughter of a grocery salesman. Couldn't we learn a lot, exchange ideas? Pearl Harbor Day, war or reality, brothers and boyfriends in arms, and I don't recall too much intelligent evaluation. This is why I'm so encouraged by today's young people. We were an apathetic generation in comparison with the intense youth of today. Connie, who was to have roomed with me sophomore year, politely explained that her West Point boyfriend found it embarrassing to fix up a Jew girl on a date. My brother, a pilot, was told that he was different, a white Jew. We knew we were different, as all people are different, not simply different on some preconceived notion, some stereotype that doesn't exist. But how refute it and still not cast aspersion on your own? How accept it and set yourself apart? These thoughts were fleeting. We didn't do anything about it, not even to the extent of formulating our own philosophy. When I married, because my husband cared to continue some of the older traditions of Judaism, beyond those commonly observed by our conservative contemporaries, I had to delve further into our heritage. I could see that to a great extent my generation had been lost to Judaism because our parents in their great desire to become part of America mistakenly equated foreign ways with Jewish ways. When the children were born, I was instrumental in the development of a nursery school in our synagogue, that was Gan Hayelen, to help in developing pride, understanding, and respect both in parents and children. We learned together that the strength of Judaism lies in its ethics, and the customs and the laws of kashrut, the observance of Sabbath and other holidays, gave us beauty and continuity as a people. Whenever I become discouraged with man's inhumanity to man, despairing in a better world, I take comfort as I light candles on Friday night to think that over 5,000 years ago someone spoke the same words and thought the same thoughts, and we still survive. My first graphic confrontation with my feeling for other people came early in my marriage. We had the opportunity to buy a home, a great step for young people, 22 years old, with one 8-month-old youngster, and hope for many more. As we met to sign our final papers, we were informed self-righteously by the seller. She felt obligated to tell us that our next-door neighbors were Negro. We continued in our transaction without hesitation. Shortly after this, when my daughter was able to talk, I recall that she loudly asked in a grocery store, "Why is that man so black?" This is typical of children, to be expected, but if you never stood in the sudden vacuum that develops around you, never had to answer quickly and easily to satisfy both the listeners and your child, you cannot imagine my feelings. I said the stock, "Why, honey, your eyes are blue, mine are brown. All people look different." This was enough then, but I knew I must think clearly and well if I wanted my children to grow up both secure and understanding. In the words of sage Hillel, if I'm not for myself, who will be for me? And if I'm only for myself, what am I? I hate the word tolerant. It implies that you can stand something, not understand. I want my children, my country, my world, to recognize differences, but never to fear or ridicule them. It's the differences that make life fun and exciting. I think the differences in the many cultures that formed America made her strong. But I'm in favor of preserving these differences. My children laugh sometime at this ambivalence. I insist I'm not prejudiced. I've had Greek, Finnish, and now an Argentinian live with us, but I refuse to condone interdating. I don't want to homogenize people. Neither do I want to inhibit their growth and development. I think we contribute more to each other, to the social pattern, and to ourselves when we are individuals. But each individual must have the opportunity to reach his greatest potential. Education is the only answer for a better society. Education by book and above all by example.
That's terrific. That's terrific.
I found it. I found
Thank
it
you. Thank
while I was
you.
looking through papers.
That's really wonderful.
But I thought, oh, how Louise teased me after Sidney got married. Well, I went to Connecticut College just that one year, and then my mother was ill, and I had to come home and take care of her. And I think at that point my father was not working, and I worked in Newberry's. The person that I was in that little thing, you know, you took your picture and it came out in a little strip. Well, I was in there developing it. And it was interesting to see how different it was. We worked 6-day week. We worked 6 to 8, 9 to 6, and on Thursday nights till 9. And I think my first salary was $13 a week. $13 a week. And then I got rescued because they came over from John Irving's and offered me a raise. I got 17 when I worked at John Irving's. Mm-hmm. And then Lucille Alderman asked me to come work at Lojo's shop. And that's when Arnold and I did our cook. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. But those were not, you know, they were hard years and they were good years at the same time. Mm-hmm. I think I learned a lot. And then, you know, you had to give your money home. How we did it with $13 a week. I know I gave my mother $5. I had to spend on car fare, And I went to Stone Secretarial School one night a week because I thought, I've got to do better than this. Arnold used to get upset because I would type, I would practice type, we'd be holding hands and I'd be typing in his hand.
Well, you became involved in volunteer work and community work immediately.
As soon as we moved to Lakeview Terrace, I got involved in Evening Group Hadassah. There was a Hannah Senish group in those days, which, doesn't, the evening group doesn't exist anymore. And in Ort, and I was in the afternoon group of Ort, but they were all older women. And I got a group of my contemporaries. Everyone had come home from service. I had already started Gan Haeled, so I got to know people as they were coming home from service, couples that moved into the city. And
where was it located?
What, Gan Haeled?
Yes.
In the old B'nai Jacob basement.
Okay.
In the basement there. There weren't
This
the
was
same-
on where Audubon Street is now?
No, B'nai Jacob.
B'nai Jacob. Okay.
B'nai Jacob was on George Street.
George Street.
B'nai Jacob was on George Street. And there weren't the same rules. You didn't have to have special toilets and things then. We did it in the Sunday school rooms.
Right.
But I got a group of women together who, I think Gloria Schaefer was one of them, Anita Abrams, Janice Stone. I got a few of them together and we started an afternoon group of Ort. It was called West End then, I don't know what it is today. And, and then I moved here.
What were some of the activities that Ort did in those
I'll tell you a
days?
very interesting thing. I'm digressing, I know. Babe Schifrin, Ruth Bloom, do you know Ruth Bloom?
Yeah.
Ruth, her husband had just come home from service when I was active in Ort. And he came and spoke to us about his experience in Casablanca, where Ort had a school. It was the only way Jews could study. They lived in a mellah in Casablanca. And I was lucky enough to find somebody who could come and speak, who saw what Ort schools could do.
Mhm. Mhm. Yeah.
We forget some of these things as time goes on. I'm a life member, but I'm not active anymore.
Now, Ruth Bloom also got you involved with the March of Dimes.
Then I moved here, and Ruth lived around the corner, and her son Richard had been severely crippled by polio, and Ruth got involved in March of Dimes, and she asked me to lead a Mother's March. Mother's March was really a March of Dimes too. It was really dimes. So Arnold and I took the film, and we went, in those days, the wards, the individual political wards, were the place to go. We spoke at a different ward every night, and that got us right through the month, because there were 31 wards in New Haven then, got us right through the month. And the mayor gave us a police, Frank McManus was our driver. He became police chief, I think, didn't he?
Who?
Frank McManus
Yeah, he was.
became police chief.
Yeah.
He was our driver. We set up the city, and with Arnold had great sensitivity. Or there was still Oak Street and places like that, and people said, "Well, we're not going to walk upstairs there. We're not going to go there. The people, they don't have any money." And Arnold said, "Give them the privilege. It's a privilege to give." Arnold and I took those neighborhoods. We'd walk up to the 6th floor, and they were waiting there with dimes in their hand. And, it was such a wonderful experience. It was in the news, front page every day, the month of January. People who haven't been through polio epidemics do not understand how it involved a community. And we were very successful. I think we raised about, I don't have the headlines anymore. I think we raised about $20-something thousand, which today would be nothing. But it was in nickels and dimes, and it was the average person. We were all, because of Franklin Roosevelt, we all had a feeling for it. And it was so exciting. And we ran it again the second year. And the second year, I think, was the year of the Salk vaccine. Well, I thought I did it, you know. And after that, I never refused anything. And Council of Jewish Women called me, and I never belonged to that. And they wanted me to be president. President? I don't even know anything about your organization. So I joined, and I was president a few years later. I have a little thing. I was president a few years later. And it was exciting to me because they were doing different things. I was active in Ort and Hadassah and in my synagogue, but this was different. Council had been called on by the United States government, you know. I don't know if you know much of the history. Highest star, you know, they called on the United States government because the United States government called on them. They were, you've seen that movie, Crossing Delancey. Girls were brought into white slavery crossing Delancey because they came in, young women came in without family. And so Council started helping these women. And this was I think when United Nations first started, Council was one of the first non-aligned organizations that was represented at United Nations. And I learned so much from them. Emma Cohn-Podloff started the Educational Loan Fund, and that was marvelous. In those days, it was non-interest loan. Governments weren't giving college loans, but Council was giving non-interest loans. You had to pay it back the next year, but so it could be given out again. And so I was on there. I was on the Educational Loan Fund board. I think first I was secretary, then I was treasurer, then I was president, and you could do it 6 years, so I was on that for 18 years.
This is
And
nationally?
No, this
locally?
was done through our local
Local.
chapter. It was really remarkable. And then there was also the 60 Plus Club, which was at the Jewish Center. And in those days, 60 Plus was not as young as it is today. The majority of the 60 Plusers that we had were foreign born. On a Tuesday, we could have, Council did it, not the center. We had sometimes 200 people for lunch. And on Friday morning, we'd have a discussion group, and these people were so bright. We'd have a discussion group in that little lounge they had in the old center. And I was president, I was chairperson. They had their own president. I was chairperson of the 60 Plus Club for years. And it was an absolute delight. There were some wonderful people. And it was interesting. Someone would say, once I was going to a B'nai Jacob luncheon, and I had to first stop and pick up some of the 60 Plusers to take them to the center. So someone said to me, well, why are you taking that? Her mother is sitting, why are you taking, her mother is one of the people you picked up, she's here. And this one, her grandmother is one of the people you picked up, and she's here. You know, those women were so proud to say, no, I have a ride, you don't have to pick me up. And I recognized it, and I didn't resent it. I picked up, it was Bernie Lubin's grandmother, Mrs. Edelman. And she was such a wonderful lady. She wore shoes laced up to here. And I'd pick her up, how are you today, Mrs. Edelman? Thanks be to God. That was always her thing. And then there was a Mrs. Sickle that I used to pick up on Colony Road. I think she was Arnie Smolin's grandmother. You know, they were wonderful people. Wonderful people. And the best thing of all was the experience I got. Helen Harrison, Terry Harrison, Pearl Harris. These women were all women I would never have known. In the old days, we were very, Michigan Israel was the German Jews, B'nai Jacob was the Russian Jews. There was no socialization between them till I found it through Council of Jewish Women. It happened through those years. It was
And what years were these about?
I don't mark it down. See what happens when you get old, you get garrulous, and you have to forgive me.
Okay.
I found
Turn
this.
it back on?
I was I was
Okay, wait,
pres-
wait,
No
just,
problem.
okay, go ahead.
I was president from 56 to 58 of council. Okay. And I must have done something after that.
Okay, what are these other things you have?
Well, I found a few other things. I got some papers out there too. I was women's division chairman of, it was then called, it doesn't even say, Community Council.
What years?
80, 81, 82, 83. And then my daughters and I started a store, and I don't even have the years on that, so I wasn't as active in those days. But these are some of the things that really, I'm digressing. These are the things that please me. Arnold got the covered key. No, this is the Ner Tamid at B'nai Jacob. And then I got it, and that was kind of nice, wasn't it? And,
Now, do you want to say a little bit about what the award means? The Ner Tamid?
Ner Tamid is the...
It's a Boy Scout award.
No.
No.
I have those in the other room. Ner Tamid is B'nai Jacob, is...
Okay. For service?
For service. And then I got the covered key in... Do I have Arnold's covered key here? No, I don't. I got the covered key from B'nai Jacob, from JCC. I can't read it. Is that 81?
I think so. It's very small, you need a magnifying glass. That's really nice.
Oh,
Okay.
but there are all kinds of things.
Now, if I could just go back for a minute.
Oh, yeah,
You
well, I'm
decided
in the
to
wrong-
go back to college.
Oh, right.
You okay?
I have my diploma.
What made you decide to go back at that point?
Well, I had started earlier. Oh, goodness, I don't have it here. I had it. Oh, I have it somewhere
That's
else.
okay. We can look for these
I wrote
things.
a whole other thing.
Okay.
I was doing recording for the blind, and I love doing it. I mean, that's a wonderful, wonderful thing. And in those days, you did your own monitoring, and I would have to turn the thing off and stop and look up words. I would have to see how the pronunciation of the words. I used the dictionary so much, and I said, I think I need to go back to college. And by then the kids were getting older, and I, Southern is right here, but in those days Southern was just a teacher's college. And I started back, and then there was a little competition between one of my daughters and myself. And I said, this isn't fair to her. So I stopped for a couple of years, and I went back later when she had better self-image. And then I went back, and the interesting thing is that while I was there, my daughter Susan came, and she was there, and then her husband got his master's there. He wasn't her husband then. He got his master's there. And
It was a family experience.
but it was just a teacher's college then. So I taught school for a couple of years. And then when my father died, we realized that he'd been kind of covering up my mother's Alzheimer's. We, didn't have a name in those days. And she was very young. She was 72 when he died. And he'd been covering up for a while. And he called me, oh, this is a terrible story. You don't have to, you can delete things if they're too much, can't you?
Go ahead.
It was my in-laws, we were getting ready for my in-laws' 50th wedding anniversary party. And my father called me. He was going to go to Israel. Sidney was pregnant with her son, her first son. She was living in Israel. My father was going to go over with the Jewish war veterans. And he called me and he said, Lou, I think I have to talk to you about Mother. And I said, okay, Dad, I'll talk to you tomorrow. He died in his sleep that night. And my mother called Arnold. I was teaching. My mother called Arnold and she said, I made Dad breakfast and he won't get up. And Arnold went over and found him. So then she came to live with us for a couple of years until she began wandering, and it was just, you know, there was just no support. There was nothing, there wasn't even a diagnosis. So I had to stop teaching. I couldn't emotionally give the kid, and as far as I'm concerned, teaching is the best profession in the world if you can afford it. And I could afford it. But emotionally, I couldn't give the kids what they deserved. I mean, I had Shia Hecht as a star pupil, and to this day, he still treats me. You know, you're supposed to serve your teacher. If we are at organization meetings and things, Shia will go get a plate and serve me. So will Mark Schifrin. Do you know Mark Schifrin?
No, I don't know.
Well, Mark will do the same thing. He was one of my pupils, and Sharon Bender was one of my pupils. They were wonderful. I was just a few years, but it was so wonderful. But that's I never went back to it, unfortunately. Or
Well, just reading some of the articles at the Jewish Historical Society about all of the organizations you've been involved with, both Jewish and non-Jewish.
well, today, you know, this is my third year as chairman of the Community Soup Kitchen at Christ Church. This is the saddest time to be involved with food and food production. There's such a shortage, and there's so many more people who need it. It's emotionally, it's just tearing me apart. And my son is with the World Bank, and his area of expertise is food production and distribution. And he said the meetings are just endless. The situation in Haiti is awful. And it's going to get worse here. We're seeing such an increase in the number of people who come every day for lunch. And it's frightening, and the food bank has less food. That means that we have to buy more. You know, what we get at the food bank, we pay very little. If it's government food, we pay nothing. And so it costs, it's very hard now. It's very hard because the food bank gets so much less food. And it's going to be, they had a walk yesterday. I don't know how they did. But I don't see things as getting better. I think about my years during the Depression, and I'm just wondering how it's going to be for people here now. So what else do I
You've
do?
also
I'm
been
president.
involved with...
I'm on the board now at Southern, which is very exciting, on the foundation board. And I'm watching that school grow and grow, and it's thrilling to me to be part of it. And one of my interests, I have a lot of papers I wanted to show you. One of my interests is the Peabody Museum, and that was because of Arnold. When Arnold went back to college, you know, he graduated Yale when he was 65. So he made my Southern degree look like nothing. You know, he had his Yale degree.
And he studied?
He studied ethnicity in the United States largely, but emphasis on Native Americans. And so he got very involved in the Peabody. And fortunately, he wanted them to redo the Native American room. And they did finish it in November, the November before he died, and that got a lot of the things in the celebration. Thank goodness he saw it finished and clean. And so, you know, I've gotten involved. I just finished, in his memory, giving them acoustic guides. They've never had acoustic guides at the Peabody. They do now. Mm-hmm. And I thought that Arnold would be very happy to know that. So that was some of the things. What else? I've been...
St. Rave's, Ezra Academy.
Oh, Ezra, I'm not, you know, it's not supposed to be known because I'm on the I've been on the scholarship committee for, I don't know, 20 years or more. And that's supposed to be something we don't know.
I just heard a beep. Does that mean that they, no, okay. Yeah.
There's supposed to be an honor in Israel in November, I think, for UJA, and I think I've been a Line of Judah member from '86, I guess.
Mhm.
I'm amused with that because, you know, Arnold and I...
Waiting for your next visit to bring more stuff.
Okay, here. Is this anything that they want? Okay. Oh, I want to bring this to Tiffany, Jacob. Hey. Here's me with the King of Sweden. Huh? Oh, this is a better one. Huh? You know, Arnold got me involved in that.
What are you doing with the King's Suite? This is Thailand.
Well, I'll show
This
you.
is Thailand.
Yes,
Very
I'll
Thailand.
show you.
We would love to have this picture.
Yeah. Okay.
Here's it. Here we
Okay,
got.
are you on?
Wait a minute.
Okay. Now tell me about these pictures.
Oh, okay. Well, no. Can the camera travel?
Hold them up.
No,
Yes.
just.
Hold them up.
Well,
You can zoom in. You can zoom in, right? This is you with the.
This is the same. This is the
Okay.
same thing.
Tell me about this
Wait,
picture.
hold it up a little bit. Down a little. Down.
Okay.
That's good.
This is August 1987
Okay.
in Bangkok, Thailand.
Well, you know that Arnold was always very involved, and he became what they call a Baden-Powell Fellow. I'll show you the things upstairs. He became a Baden-Powell Fellow years ago in Chicago. Oh, God, that's a great story, too. Anyhow, he became a Baden-Powell Fellow. That's part of the International Fellowship in Scouting. And you know, Arnold always ran international camporees. He always thought maybe someday these guys will camp together, and years later they'll be leaders in their community, in their countries, and remember their camping days. Anyhow, Arnold became a Baden-Powell Fellow in Chicago. We went to several functions, and the King of Sweden is the honorary chairman of Baden-Powell. So we first met him in Chicago, and then we went to a dinner in California, and we met him. And we were going to Thailand. We took our two of our granddaughters to out on the Silk Route in China, and then we went to what was then still Burma, and then we went to Thailand. And as long as we were doing it that way, Arnold said, "The King's going to be there. You become a Baden-Powell Fellow also." So he was sweet. He posed with my granddaughters. He was just so nice. But it was an interesting. We first came into the hotel. It was that marvelous Oriental in Bangkok, and we went to this place for lunch. And I pointed to the King, who was a very small man, very unassuming. And I pointed to the King. I said he was at the buffet table, and I said my granddaughters were 14 and 15. I said, "There's the King of Sweden," and they said, "He's not wearing a king suit." He's not wearing a king suit. But he was there. But when we first met him was in Chicago when Arnold got the Baden-Powell thing. We were walking through the receiving line. It was lunchtime, and the King was smoking a cigarette. And I said, "You shouldn't be smoking." And Arnold said he thought the police were going to come. He thought they were going to carry me away. And the King said, "Why not, madam?" And I said, "Today is the Great American Smokeout." It was the first smokeout we had. I said, "Today's the Great American Smokeout." He said, "Well, I'm not American." I said, "I know that, and you know that, but your lungs don't." We met at this dinner in San Francisco. At least 2 or 3 years later, he reached and he was standing. Arnold always said he was standing by the Swedish meatballs. He was standing at the table, and he put his hand in his pocket, and he pulled out a package of nicotine gum. This is years later. And he said, you see, I've stopped smoking. He said, but this is a nasty habit too. I just couldn't get over the kind of mind that could, but someone said probably nobody ever spoke to him the way I had in Chicago.
Something else that